Hi, I'm Lisa Jones, and I'm a former certified public accountant for Pricewaterhouse, Ernst& Young, and I also have had a shared death experience which changed my life, and I'm really excited to share that with you. So on February 22nd, 2004, my husband passed away after a long illness. He had been sick for 7 years, and he had lymphoma cancer, and he had 3 stem cell transplants, multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation, and it was a really difficult time. He was actually 44 when he passed away. And so the night that it happened, actually, hospice had been called that day because up until then, he didn't even believe he was really dying, but he was incoherent that morning. And I called his doctor. And so they said, let's send hospice over. And they actually evaluated him and said that it'll probably be at least 2 to 3 weeks before he passes. He's not looking imminent in any way. And I called his brother and best friend, and they came over. And it was the first time I really wasn't alone in the house with him at this point. We had 2 young children. They were 1 and 3 when he was diagnosed and 8 and 10 when he died. So after hospice came, my kids ended up leaving the house that night. My son went to Ian's mother's house, and my daughter went to her best friend's. And I went and, took care of Ian that evening. It was actually the first time he had been given any pain medication or anything. And I just kissed him on the head and said goodnight. And then his brother came into the room to take care of him. So I went and slept on my daughter's bed. And before I fell asleep, I prayed to the angels and just said, please help us. There's no way out at this point. So I fell asleep. And that's when I always get a little choked up because it's so visceral when I remember it. Basically, 2 angels just came and escorted my soul out of my body and took me to the other side. And what I call heaven, it was the most beautiful place I have ever been. There were rolling, gorgeous hills and colors I've never seen. And in the distance, there was this beautiful castle-like structure that they just, next thing I know, we were inside of it. And there were, all of a sudden, I could hear choirs singing. And there were just like all these banners in all the corridors. And there was an announcement, the Grand Mr. Ian Sharp is about to arrive. And as I was approaching down this corridor, it was to the end of this balcony, and I could look down and I saw all these souls coming together. And I can't describe what they really looked like other than I just knew it was Ian's soul family, and that they were so excited. And they're like, oh my gosh, he's coming, he's almost here, he's almost here. Then all of a sudden there was this giant door that started to open. You could almost hear it scraping on the ground, and it just, and everybody turned, all the souls at the same time. He's here. And just at that moment, he started to walk through, and I saw him, and the amount of unconditional love and peace. And I thought, I never want to leave this place. It's just so amazing. And then right at that moment, there was a knock on my door. Lisa, wake up, wake up. Ian just took his last breath. And it was his brother waking me up to let me know. And that moment, it was like a trap door opened in heaven, and my soul fell back into my body. And I remember it just this thud back into my physical body. And I bounced out of bed, and I was so actually excited because I saw where he was going. And yet I knew that just that was not like an appropriate response in that moment because my husband just died. And yet I had all this excited feeling. And to top it off, I thought he was going to be going to hell because he hadn't been baptized. I was very religious, and I believed that, because he was unwilling to be baptized, that he literally was going to go to hell. So that made it even more exciting to me that he got to go to heaven. And so I ran down to our bedroom, and, his body was laying, but it wasn't him. It was just almost like a shell. And I could just see that his soul was gone and he had gone to heaven, and I got to witness that. I have never heard of a shared death experience, and I didn't know for years after that until I just randomly read a near-death experience book that talked about near-death experience. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what I experienced. But I wasn't dead. I wasn't, I didn't have a near-death experience, but, it was all so similar, like the colors and the unconditional love and just the excitement and beauty and the cleanliness. That's what, like, that was the biggest thing, is just how clean it is here, in that heavenly realm versus here. And then only recently, after I moved to Maui and I got involved with the international studies of near-death experiences, did I meet a man who wrote a book about shared death experiences. And that's when I started hearing that they're now starting to study shared death experiences. So the colors in heaven, and again, it's so hard to articulate because I feel like we don't even have words to express, but the light of the colors were so dynamic and so multidimensional. I mean, it's unlike, again, I almost feel like here on planet Earth, we live in this kind of flat Stanley. I don't know if you've ever heard of people sending around this little flat Stanley doll to take on their vacation or whatever, and you take photos with it. And that's kind of what I feel like here on Earth. It's like we're living in this flat Stanley world where it's, the colors are just saturated, but there's no light in the colors here. And so and then there's just such a wider range of colors. And like I said, there's no words to even express what they are because we don't have them here. But yeah, it was a really amazing experience to witness that. Yes, I was raised Lutheran. And in fact, it was actually kind of traumatic because I was in a parish where our youth minister ended up molesting a lot of the girls in my confirmation class. And it's so interesting because actually this leads back to my near-death experience, that when he took me to the basement, like I knew something was going to happen. And so I had the sense to get out before anything did happen. And I attribute that to the fact that I recently found out that I had a near-death experience when I was 2 weeks old. And this was through a guided meditation. And again, it was just so interesting. I was on a guided meditation, not thinking anything of where it was going to take me. But the next thing I know, I remember being born. I was adopted as a baby. And so after I was taken from my birth mother, I was just in a room for 2 weeks, basically, where caregivers would come and feed me and take care of me. But I also had colic. So I was crying a lot and they were having a really hard time consoling me. And so what I saw in this guided meditation is that one of the caregivers picked me up and shook me. And I was like, okay, not only was I taken from my mother, but, I don't have a consistent caregiver and I'm really uncomfortable in my body. And so I just popped out of my body and I'm like, I'm out of here. And so in this guided meditation, I witnessed again being in heaven, and I was just surrounded by all these beautiful angels. It's going to again bring me to tears because they just lovingly said, you have work to do on earth and you need to go back. And so I reluctantly went back into my body. It was a few days later, but my adoptive parents, that's when they picked me up or got me or whatever. And I had the most loving mother that was just so, I mean, I even told her as a 4-year-old, like this was God's plan. You couldn't have babies, but another mommy had to have me so that I could be your baby. So because of that near-death experience, it makes so much sense because as a child, I saw energies. I saw, like, we lived in Colorado in the mountains. I saw cowboys and Indians outside my windows at night. I felt aliens come and like put medicine in my mouth and poke my toes with needles when I was a little child. And my mom and dad, of course, didn't believe me. But now that I know about near-death experiences and what happens after you have one, that you do have these sixth sense, really elevated. That makes sense to me why then, like when I went down to the basement with my minister, I knew that something bad was going to happen. And then actually later we were at a youth convention and he and my best friend were missing in this group. We were going to go on a walk and people are like, where are they? And I said, oh, they're in that extra hotel room having sex. And sure enough, that's what was happening. But I just thought, like, I was kind of saying it in a jokingly way, but that is one of the things that I've been doing my entire life is I tell the truth and I don't even know that I'm telling the truth. Like it just comes through me. But those are signs of having a near-death experience, that you're super tapped in, that your truth just comes through you and, that heightened sixth sense. So anyway, getting back to the religion part. So when that happened, again, I was so religious. I was the youth leader. I believed if you weren't baptized, you were going to hell. I mean, I took it all in. And then when he confessed to doing this to girls, I stepped away from my religion at that point. But then when I got married and had kids, I felt like they really needed that foundation. So I became Episcopalian. And again, I was totally in belief of all the rules that the church said, that you have to be baptized and, that there's heaven and hell and all of this. And interestingly, when I went through the Episcopal church and my husband was dying, I went for counseling. And again, the minister tried to hit on me. So between the two ministers that were, men that, I mean, that's what I realize now, that religion, it's like an organization where men come to power, generally men, and then sometimes take advantage of women. And so between that and then having my own connection with that shared death experience, I'm like, I don't need this anymore. So I stepped away from the church. I walked away. I really believe, that a lot of that is just for control and a lot of times manipulation of other people. So I am not a fan of organized religion any longer. I feel like heaven is when people go to the other side, they actually get to witness what they think their heaven is. Because I do think it would be jarring if I had gone to the other side and I was in a Buddhist temple or, like a mosque or something like that. So I do believe, and again, I've interviewed a lot of near-death experiencers, and it seems to me that most people witness what it is that they are kind of anticipating. I mean, I don't believe in death. I think we just transition into another realm. And so a lot of times, whatever your current belief is, you just step right through the threshold and you're in the next realm with that same belief system, with that same, and then it might unfold from there. But I think when you're first walked through, or, again, all the people I've interviewed, it just seems like that's a great way to welcome them in rather than having it be, because it can be anything, I truly believe now. I mean, my husband has visited me, and again, I've had some other guided meditations where I get to go with him and he shows me. It's almost like he has a holodeck, like from Star Trek, and he can go in and go anywhere at any time and like help me or my children. It's amazing. The other side is anything we want it to be. I started interviewing other near-death experiencers after I moved to Maui, and I was invited to be a speaker at the International Association of Near-Death Studies here on Maui. They've got chapters all over the country. And so after I spoke, the woman running it here invited me to be her co-director. And again, it was like opening my eyes. And this was 2017 or 2018. And I mean, I had my shared death experience in 2004. So this was many, many, many years later. And I started hosting the near-death experiencer support group, which met before our meetings. And it just opened me up. Every time someone would talk, it would bring me right back to my experience. And so I just fell in love with hearing all these stories because it really started unfolding my story more for me. And so then I hosted through, it's called IAN's, International Association of Near-Death Studies, their support groups once a month. I did that for probably almost 4 years, maybe, and supporting people that, my goodness, a lot of times once people have a near-death experience, they are shunned, they are told they're crazy, they're told, they need psychiatric help. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. Like, if anything, they've been awakened and now they know the truth. And it becomes really difficult to live here on planet Earth after you've been to the other side, where it's just so stunningly beautiful and loving and kind. And then you come back here and it's like, no. So after being a part of this group here on Maui, I went to their conference, and then I got to meet a lot of the top near-death experiencers. And so that's when I started interviewing them on my show. It was such a joy. You can still look it up, Exploring Death podcast. I still pay to have them out there, but it was so much fun to interview everybody. So my near-death experience, again, I had no idea I'd had one until I was on doing a guided meditation, and it just brought me to this moment in time. And I had been doing a lot of work on inner child wounds, and I think that's where my mind took me. And again, I don't have proof of a near-death experience. I don't know. In fact, the place where I was born, which was an unwed mother's home in Denver, Colorado, the place actually is burned down. I went with my birth mother a couple of years ago to look at it, and the place was no longer there. So I don't even know why I said it was burned down. I don't know if it was no longer there, but maybe it burned down. So I just knew from this experience of the guided meditation of leaving my body that it felt very similar to how I felt when I had my shared death experience. However, I wasn't in a field, I wasn't in that castle-like experience. It was almost like I was in a nursery in heaven with all these beautiful, loving angels there and them consoling me and telling me it was going to be okay, but then I needed to go back. I so felt that unconditional love, which is palpable when you're on the other side. And that's what makes it so difficult for people that have had a near-death experience to want to come back. Because again, it's like we're isolated and we're alone and we don't have that oneness of unconditional love. And I definitely felt that in my remembrance of my near-death experience. I was not given a choice to stay. It was, you're going back. Like it wasn't even a question of staying in any means. It was almost like, I think my psyche or my soul was just like, what is going on? This is too much. And so I popped out, and then it was just an immediate, you're loved. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine, but you got to go back. So yeah, I am not afraid of death. In fact, I'm looking forward to seeing how this all ends because I've witnessed so many different, deaths throughout my life. And as I'm a hospice volunteer and a death doula, and in fact, a few years ago, after moving to Maui, I was just sitting it was like a Saturday morning with my phone, just looking out. All of a sudden I get an alert saying incoming missile from North Korea. This is not a test. This is actually happening. Take cover. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I had no idea this is how it was going to end. I'm actually really excited. I actually was ready to get in my car and go to the beach and say, bring it on. Because, if I'm going to go that way, I want to go quick. I don't want to have the radiation poisoning or whatever after the fact. And meanwhile, I know all the islands, just people were driving off the road and just freaking out about the whole thing. But I've really, again, from interviewing near-death experiencers, every one of them says, before impact in a car accident, or if they were falling or freezing to death or whatever their circumstances was, their body pops out or their soul pops out before the impact. So they don't feel the pain. They don't experience that. And so I trust that that'll happen with me too. So I'm just looking forward to seeing how it all ends. Sometimes when I get kind of depressed or down, I'm like, I'm ready to go. Why am I still here? But I guess if we're still here, it means we have work to do. So that's what I'm doing. So am I doing the work that I'm here to do? I feel like I'm leaning in closer and closer. Part of it is literally sharing my experiences with people just to help them as whatever they're going through. A lot of times I get feedback from people that it really helps to know that these stories exist and can help them. So I'm leaning into being an eternal love and abundance coach, which is helping people as they are on their journey here on earth. And that's connecting with their passed away loved ones. If it's, figuring out why they're stuck in life. I've had so many experiences through these shared death experiences and talking about near-death experiences, and then cultivating relationships on the other side. I mean, I call him my heavenly husband. He's been helping me for 20 years. And he talks to me, he guides me, he helps me. My mom is the same way. Ram Dass, who's a spiritual leader here on Maui, I had a shared death experience with him, and he's guiding me at all times. So I am here to now help people literally connect with their loved ones and cultivate that relationship. So it's not over when they die. It's just a new experience of a relationship with their soul. And it's super exciting. It's super fun. Yeah, I feel like I'm on my path. The best is a shared death experience because you don't have to do the dying part. That's why I think I was attuned to having shared death experiences because of my near-death experience. Because I've had them with my husband, my dad, my mom, and Ram Dass. They were so deep and so clear. I only traveled to heaven with my husband, but I witnessed the souls leaving. And for example, Ram Dass, oh my gosh, he died on December 22nd, 2019. And I had taken a nap that day, had gotten up, and I was I was just kind of walking next to my bed. And all of a sudden I got this shove and I fell onto my bed and I said, Ram Dass, what are you doing? And I'm like, why did I just say that? And then an hour later, I get a text that he had passed away the hour before. And so he literally did a drive-by, pushed me off my feet. And then the next day, the 23rd, I was laying on a chiropractic table here in Makawao, and I'm laying down, and all of a sudden I just feel his energy come over me, kind of like this blanket just above me. And in my mind, I'm like, Ram Dass, go to the light, go to the light. And he's like, Lisa, you are the light. And then he just descended his energy right on me, like, and I just started crying because I could feel it was that unconditional love that, again, I felt when I went to heaven. And then on Christmas Day, the 25th, I was invited to his home to sit with his body, and a bunch of us were there praying with him. And so after about an hour of just sitting and praying, I went up to his body and I put my hands on his, and he says, let's go. And I closed my eyes, and he just took me into the universe, into the stars and the planets, and just, he just took me all over. It was amazing. And then I like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, back in my body again. And yeah, so I've had some profound experiences. It was almost like I touched his body, and then it was like my soul just connected to his, and he just shot us into space. So I was surrounded with all the stars, and then he took me by all the planets and just kind of showed me the vastness of our universe. And then the next thing I know, I was like back in my body, and I like opened my eyes. So first of all, I had a premonition actually with both of them about their deaths, which was very disconcerting, I have to say. My dad's was a little less jarring than my mom's, but my dad had said he was going to have some elective surgery before my daughter was graduating in 2012. And I just said immediately out of my mouth was, Dad, please don't do that. I have a really bad feeling. I don't, please come to my daughter's graduation before you do that. And so thankfully, he postponed the surgery, came to the graduation, and then a couple months later, he said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm going to do the surgery. Well, because I was taking my daughter to Europe for her graduation gift. And he's like, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to upset you. And I was just like, Dad, no, I have a really bad feeling. And, I think you could die. I think, and short of that, you're going to end up with like a colostomy bag. He was doing some stomach surgery. He had diverticulitis, and he didn't want to, I guess there was a section in his colon that would be taken out. And he said, oh, no, it's going to be fine. I was so not okay with it. And so I get back from Europe. He had the surgery that day. I call, and his third wife was saying, oh, he can't talk. And then the next day he went back to the hospital and was unconscious for 5 days. And so I had flown out there, and I was in the room when we decided that we had to pull the plug because all of his organs were shutting down. And so when we were in the room, all of a sudden, it was almost like this, oh my God, it's just coming back to me. It was like this door like opened, and his mom and his dad, which are my grandma and grandpa, and his aunt were just standing there waiting for him. And I could just see like his soul just exiting his body and just like going up and meeting them. And they were so excited to have him there. And meanwhile, I'm like narrating this, like I'm watching a sports game or something. And I'm narrating it for my brother and his wife because they couldn't see what I was seeing. And it was just an amazing moment. And then 6 weeks later, after he died, he came and woke me up. And it was so clearly, he woke me up out of sleep. It was probably 5 or 6 in the morning. And he's like, I have a message for you. So I just went down and just started typing. And he said, wow, Lisa, I realize what I did to my physical body is what I was doing, like how he was treating money. He was like hoarding money and then not spending it. So he had no circulation with money. Like he was just like trying to stockpile all of his money. And so what happened was in his body is that he had lack of circulation. He's like, I created in my physical body what I was doing with the spirit of money, with the energy of money. And so he said, I can see it so clearly now. Now he's like, I wish I hadn't have been so tight with my money. And, the whole idea is to let money circulate. It's like the lifeblood of our economy is to circulate money and let it flow. And the more you let out, the more that comes in. But if you just stagnate it and hold it in, then you start to create that in your body and you have physical problems. So it was dramatic and amazing. So 2 years later, she had gone to Hawaii. She lived in Minnesota with her husband, and they went for a month in Kauai. And she called me and said, "Oh, why don't you come and stay with us? It'd be so much fun." And so it turned out that I had frequent flyer miles and I got to actually fly first class. It was like the cheapest first class I've ever been able to go. I feel like it was all spirit, like had this all lined up for me. And so I got there, and then I know people on the island, so I was going to go do things with other people, but everything kept me with my mom. It was like I had a flat tire, so I stayed home. We were going to go hiking another day with my friends, and I didn't feel well, so I stayed home with my mom. And she was actually feeling like all this anxiety about things that she hadn't finished in her life. And, like she just was feeling so much uneasiness. And so I led her on a guided meditation and just said, why don't we, go in to your psyche and let's pull all those weeds that you didn't finish and just plant new ones. And so we did that. Her little kitty that had died about a year before came as her guide. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And she said, "Oh my God, I feel so much better. Thank you. Thank you." And then a couple days later, oh yeah, I was supposed to fly back and they canceled my flight because there was a big storm on the East Coast. So like I got to stay an extra day with her. And then as I was leaving the next day, I was rolling my bag out to my rental car. And it was almost like I walked through this threshold. And it was like this thought came in my head. It wasn't words. It was just something's going to happen to your mother and you're going to be back here in a week. And it was so clear that this knowledge dropped in my head. And I just was like, no, like I dismissed this. I didn't want to acknowledge it or take it seriously. So I just kept going. And I never said a word to my mom. Well, exactly a week later, I get a phone call and it was her husband calling and saying, "Oh my God, your mom just collapsed and, you need to come back. And I think she's had a stroke." And interestingly, she'd called me earlier that day and left me a voicemail that said, "Oh my God, tomorrow's our last day. I don't want to leave. I love it here so much." And then this happened about 2 hours after she left me that message. So when I flew home from Kauai, I actually flew to Ireland for my nephew's confirmation and had just flown back that day. So as soon as I got that call, I unpacked my bag, I repacked it, and I laid down for just a minute before I had to go to the airport. And as soon as I closed my eyes, I felt a spirit cat jump up on my bed. It was her cat from that guided meditation. And I heard it purring. And then all of a sudden, my mom's energy came over me and she said, "You said we'd be able to talk when I go to the other side." And I was like, "Oh my God." And so I was wide awake, except my eyes were closed because I didn't want to ruin the moment. And it was like this tsunami of love just pouring on me. And she's like, "Oh my God, I love you. I loved being your mom." And, it was such a beautiful moment. And then I called my brother on the way to the airport and told him what happened. And he said she came to me too. And so she had a message for him. And again, it was so beautiful. So I didn't call my stepdad. I didn't want to know that she had died. I'm like, I'm just going there. I get to Kauai. I drive immediately to the hospital. As soon as I got to the ICU, I walk in her room and she sits up and she looks at me eye to eye. And then she was unconscious for 5 more days. And so that was when I realized that actually souls can leave their bodies when they're still alive and go visit people, because she hadn't died, but she was in this in between state. And so then my brother came a few days later, and then my brother and I both knew she was going to die from that visitation, but my stepdad was not accepting it. So interestingly, a coincidence that one of his good friends, who was like a top neurosurgeon in Minneapolis, was coming to Kauai for vacation that exact day. So he came directly to the hospital, did an evaluation, and told him that it does not look good. Even if she wakes up, she's not going to be able to take care of herself. And so then we agreed to put her on hospice. And then just about an hour later, we were just standing with her and she just took her last breath. And again, I could just sense her energy, leaving and just ascending into the light. And again, having that moment with her when she came and spoke to me that was the most powerful part of her shared death experience. I guess the only other thing I wanted to share was just about signs and like knowing that your loved ones are still with you. And I know a lot of people, they feel like they don't get a sign or they question whether it is a sign. And so, for example, my husband comes to me as a dragonfly. And my mom comes to me as a red cardinal, and my dad is a little white butterfly. And so part of the trick to knowing that your loved one is actually there is being open to the fact that they are communicating with you. I think so many people are so resistant to actually believe it, or they need more proof, or just their fact of questioning it makes it more difficult for their loved one to come to them. And so if you have a passed away loved one and you feel like they haven't connected, there's a few things. One, if there's such deep grief that it's almost like your psyche blocks it from you because you're so caught up in the grief aspect that you're not open to receiving these messages. Because I mean, I don't want to say I can guarantee you, but it feels like from my experience that I can guarantee you that they are trying to reach out. They love you. They want you to be happy. They are not, judging you or wanting you to be upset. They want you to live life. They want you to be happy. They want you to move forward. And you got to grieve. I'm not saying don't grieve, but there's a point at which opening your heart and letting yourself live life again, that's important in order for them to come and visit you and share signs. And for example, my husband, I needed a new place to live here on Maui. And so I was guided to go to the beach. And I didn't know it was him at the time, but I just felt this overwhelming urge to go to the beach. I ran into this woman on the beach and I told her, oh my gosh, I need a new place to live. And she said, oh, well, my neighbors just got notice that their little ohana is going to be available. So she brings me up here. I meet the people and I told them that I'm a former CPA for Price Waterhouse in San Francisco. And they said, oh, do you happen to know this person? He's our investment advisor. He used to work there. I said, oh my gosh, he was my late husband's roommate 30 years ago for the 2 years that we dated. He was at my wedding. So yes, I know him. In fact, he was my investment advisor after my husband passed away. So what are the chances of that happening other than that my husband is looking out for me, helping me, and I know that that can happen for everyone else too. I would just like to share that I created an exploring death meditation that's for free. And I would love for you to have that so that you can go into and explore death and realize that it's not nearly as scary as, we all think it might be.